Thanks for the lovely introduction, and thanks for so many of you for turning out on Valentine's Day to talk about data and visualization. It really is amazing to see such a good turnout here. So before I start, I'm just going to ask for a show of hands. Who is here from a kind of a housing or architecture or housing policy background? Excellent. And who is here maybe from a more data background, data science, data engineering, data analysis? And who is here because you're my friend or family and I beg you to come? Excellent, excellent. Well, look, thanks so much for coming today, and hopefully you find this informative. It's going to be very casual, that's kind of the style, and I'll explain in a moment what we're actually going to be talking about here. So a little bit of one of the two plugs that I'll be doing today. So this is the first plug, and the second plug is going to be at the end. So I'm originally a mechanical engineer. I went here to Trinity, and a few years ago I left the field of mechanical engineering and moved into data science. I worked in the fields of data science and design, often combining those two different disciplines in interesting ways. And then last summer I bit the bullet and left that job to go and set up my own company in the area of data and design, and I decided to call the company Data and Design. So it's from the Ron Seal Garnish School of Naming Companies. So this is the little plug of my website. I'm not going to pull it full screen for now because I'll give you the proper plug at the end, because I think it makes more sense to talk about this at the end when you know hopefully a little bit more about what it is I do with data. So when I left in July, one of the first pieces I started working on was the project Dormant, which is just out here to the right, and I encourage you to look at it on your way out. It's also available online. And this is a special commission for the Housing Unlocked exhibition. So for folks visiting the exhibition for the first time, I highly recommend you check out the various things, various installations around here. They really are fantastic. And this is just a small kind of additional piece that was used in that exhibition. And we'll come back to the final Dormant piece shortly. I know it's only very small up there on the screen, and my intention is not for you to see that now, because we're going to be talking about something a little bit different at the start. And we're going to start by talking about the shapes of stories. So the famous author Kurt Vonnegut actually had a master's thesis rejected by the University of Chicago, and he claims that this thesis was rejected because it was so simple and looked like too much fun. And what he was doing was he was taking lots of different stories that had been told through the ages and plotting them on two different axes. The first axis is the time axis, so it's how time moves on. And the other axis he calls the GI axis. So this is G for good fortune and I for ill fortune. And by plotting the shapes of these stories in time, Vonnegut claims that you can kind of learn some of the common shapes and archetypes that exist around stories today. So the first one, and this is a story that's being told over and over, and every time it's told, somebody makes more money. So this one's called Man in the Hole, but it doesn't need to be about a man, it doesn't have to be getting in a hole. You can see the fortune comes down with time and comes back up at the end. For the day that's in it, I'd like to show one more, today being Valentine's Day. So the next story is called Boy Meets Girl, but it doesn't need to be about a boy, and it doesn't need to be about a girl. So it starts with a normal person having a normal day, and oh, something fantastic happens, and no. But then it works out okay. And it's with that shapes of stories that I'd like to transition to what I'd like to talk about today. Because I looked at the work I was doing to create this data visualization piece, and what you often see are the kind of final finished outputs, not the toil and problems and ups and downs that went in towards creating those. So I'd like to present to you the story curve that I have for building Dormant. And we're going to go through this curve. The rest of this talk is basically going to be different parts of this curve, but you can see it's quite undulating. There's lots of highs, a couple of occasional highs, lots of lows. And my hope for this talk today is that by following those ups and downs and what's involved to create one of these data visualization projects, you hopefully learn something new and maybe might be inspired to try some of this out yourself. So the graph here, you see the plot of the story for this piece of work. We can actually split it up into 4 different sections. These 4 different sections denote the full data visualization project stage. And these are investigating, exploring, visualizing, and storyboarding. And often you think you've made it out of one and you get pulled back in. So the rest of this talk is going to be me going through these different 4 stages in order, a couple of examples to kind of show what can happen, and then finishing with ways that you could try this out yourself. So in terms of investigation, so typically when I'm starting a project, it could be working with a client, it could be thinking about something myself. Sometimes it starts with an idea, maybe with an article I've read. Sometimes, and actually more often than not, it starts with a data set. Some new data set is released, and that gets me thinking about what can be done with that data set. And that's what happened last summer. So in April 2022, there was a census, and the results from the census are kind of drip-fed out across a few years, because there's a lot to go into actually aggregating this information. And the first readouts from the census were last summer, and that was around population and housing. So their preliminary results came out in June. As soon as they came out, I knew I wanted to do something with it. I didn't have to go and investigate the problem in terms of what I wanted to do. But I did have to explore it a lot. So in terms of looking at how vacancy is actually measured, how it's being tackled in different countries, the problems facing vacancy in Ireland specifically. What I would add though is that the architects here and people who've worked in this space are far more the experts than me. I'm just a guy kind of crunching the numbers in the background. But yeah, there's some really interesting stuff, even as I started kind of exploring that data further and further. So some of the headline figures that were widely reported on was that the census found over 166,000 vacant properties. So that's about 8% of the total housing stock we have in Ireland, or more than all of County Galway. So it's a lot. And that finding, along with a few others, was compiled into infographics by the Central Statistics Office. So you've got information on the screen here, things like, it's just a little infographic on things like population, which passed 5 million for the first time, housing, and a few more things. What the CSO also gave was some preliminary results. And they plotted it out like this. This is me scrolling through it. Again, the intention's not for you to look at and take any one piece of information from this. It's more about what was available there. So they kind of have some maps looking at housing. They have some bar charts looking at the percentage changes in population and housing stock. They've got like vacancy rates. So I'll pause the screen here for a second. This is the vacancy rate of the various counties in Ireland. So how many vacants there are per housing. And they also have data at a more granular level. So we've got 26 counties level data here, and we also have data at what's called the electoral division level. So this is down to like 3,000. It's much more granular. So you could actually zoom in on the neighbourhood where you live, or the wider area where you live, to try and explore that vacancy. The final thing that was reported from the census was reasons for vacancy. So within the census form, people had to write why the house is being vacant. Was it that the owner had deceased? Was it under renovation? There's a few other reasons for it there. And it's actually very, the CSO did an incredible job at gathering this information, and there's some really interesting stuff there. First of all, census operators are incentivized to find out that they're paid more if they can resolve the status of a house that originally they didn't know. So if you had a house that there was no one home the first time, if you can go back and deduce from speaking to the neighbours or finding out other information, you get paid more to do that. So it's a very clever system because it incentivizes people to actually find out. And within the census, again, there's 25,000 people that just marked it as other. So so we're not at a perfect system for this yet, but there is a lot there. So after looking at what was there, I kind of had the feeling that there was scope for a piece that was informative and also kind of visually coherent and striking. So I really liked the pieces that were on the CSO website, but they were all kind of a little bit different. So I thought, can I try and bring these all together into a single package, something that would be quite interesting, but also informative. And I was also told a couple of times during it to that people preferred my sober assessment of the facts and not letting my own views come into it. So it's something that I consciously had to tone down on some of my language as I was speaking about the problems the states in Ireland with vacancy today. So in stage one, you're learning, you're finding out more, you're looking at what's out there, and you're starting to think, yeah, there's kind of a niche here, there's something unique. And so if you think about back to our shape of the story, but kind of things are all going good. And you're like, all I have to do is analyze the data and get it into the right place, and then I can just build a thing. So all going to be great, it'll be all done in 2 weeks. But then this happens, and what this is the actual data exploration phase. So up on the screen there's a big nosedive, which corresponds to exploring and cleaning the data. So the data that I looked at was census data from 2022 and 2016, so I thought it might be interesting to compare that data in both years. And they have that data, like I said before, at both a counties level and the electoral division more granular level. And exploration is basically taking data and trying to understand it completely. So you're playing around with it, you're trying to discover patterns, spotting outliers, which is really important. So if you see an outlier, you start thinking about where are the stories there? Is there something that outlier is trying to tell me? But really what it means is making lots and lots of plots. You're just plotting, you're just in some kind of software, plotting a little hard out. In terms of the actual coding language and software you use for doing this, a lot of people can get hung up on what exactly is best to use for anything, and my advice for this is whatever you're comfortable using. So Microsoft Excel is much maligned, but it's actually very good for just playing around with data. And a lot of us just have knowledge about how to actually use it. So for smaller data sets, it really is fine. And I start a lot of the time when I first get a data set, the first thing I do is play around with it in Excel, making silly plots and just making sure, seeing how much of the data is just junk or things like that. And then I bring it into the code later. For those who are interested in kind of getting into that kind of data analysis or coding, I recommend using one of Python or. They're both kind of interchangeable. I'm in the Python group. Both groups will tell you that their group is the best. They're both fine. There's no worries around that. And so again, when you're playing around with this data, it's really about what you yourself are most comfortable with. That's what I always tell people. And what we want is to fully understand our data. That's the end goal of this phase. And what makes this tricky is that every data set you'll find will have some kind of weirdness or strangeness that's unique to that data set alone. And you think you've solved it, and then there's something that you didn't think about. And I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive. So I'm going to spend 4 slides just showing you one particular example. And the intention is not we understand absolutely everything that's going on. What I want to show you is why having to plot all these things and find these problems is an important task. So how it all looks correct, but it's actually wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with some plots, and I'm going to zoom in on the plots. The eagle-eyed observers around you might notice there's actually no labels on this plot, which is like a cardinal sin in data science and data visualization. But I'm the one giving the talk, so could do as I like. So what we're looking at here is a very simple plot of housing stock against vacancy. So we see Dublin is high to the right, Cork a little bit further, and we can see there's a centre line along the middle. And the further a county is away from that centre line, the more it deviates from the others. So again, very simple plot. This is the first thing you do. I've got houses, I've got vacancy, I'll plot them against each other. So that's fine, that's for 2022. So the next question we might say is, well, I want to bring in the 2016 data as well onto this one plot. So how can I make it all, how can I have it all come here? Well, one thing we can do is we can say, earlier on I mentioned the vacancy rate, so we can divide the housing stock by the vacancy. So that would be one number for 2022, and then we can do that same calculation for 2016. So this is just rearranging those circles, where we basically now have plotted the vacancy rate for 2016 on the x-axis and the vacancy rate for 2022 on the y-axis. And what this line here means is that all the counties have a vacancy rate that's lower in 2022 than they do in 2016. So for every county in Ireland, the vacancy rate has gone down. So that's the kind of plots that you're just plotting away to start thinking, okay, it's actually moving down in every county, but then you might start thinking about, well, what counties are exhibiting the largest change, or you might go down a few other ways. So far so good in terms of that. So what we'll do is, that's it at a county level. What we can do is do the same thing at that electoral divisions level, so we can start seeing that what county has, I would say, what electoral division, probably a more rural one, has the highest vacancy. So we do the exact same plot of vacancy rates for the 3,000 more granular data. But there's something strange happening here. And what's strange is that we actually have some data points that are along the axes. And apologies for anyone on the perimeters that can't see this, but we've actually got a few circles that are stuck here on the axes. And what each of these circles means is that in this place, the vacancy rate goes from being something like 10%, 20%, 30% in one year to absolute zero the other. So when you look at this, you start thinking, okay, there's probably something not right there. And it's happening both ways around. It's happening 2016 to 2022, and it's happening 2022 to 2016. So there's something a bit weird going on. So what is going on? So what we can do is we can isolate the rogue ones on the axes by themselves. So that's these guys, and I'll start hovering my mouse over them to start looking at them. So we've got, and again, probably small on the screen, but the only thing you need to learn from this is that they're all quite small rural communities. We're not seeing a Terranure or a Harold's Cross on this. We're seeing quite small rural communities. That's in 2016. And we start looking at the ones missing in 2022, we start seeing something strange. We start seeing two regions that are put together. So we can see a slash here between Kenua and Mostragria, or Glenroe and Ballantyre. And in fact, if I hover over this one, we've got Drumreilly West and Drumreilly East. And as I hover around here, some of the ones that are missing this way, Drumreilly East is there as well. So again, this is the type of investigation that we need to be doing on this data. I'm not able to find Drumreilly East here, but take my word for it, it's here. So what happened is, between 2016 and 2022, some of the smaller rural electoral regions were combined together into one. So, the east and west are combined together into one. But the data didn't, the way I was analysing the data didn't actually take that into account. So all of my calculations and all of my vacancy rates were actually wrong. And what was worse was that it was wrong in a non-obvious way. So again, I'm not trying to labour this point too much, but that's the key part to all this data cleaning and exploration, is to find the ways you can often be wrong in ways that you look like you're right. And especially when you're coming out into an exhibition and you're making claims to the public, you want to make sure that you can back this up many different ways. So that's the deep dive into data cleaning on Valentine's Day. I hope you enjoyed that. So really, there's a kind of couple of, so that's the kind of exploration that's revealed that. The next thing you would have to do is clean it. So if you just had a few errant regions, you could just go into your software and change them. But if you've got a whole data set, or if you think there's other data sets where this is affected as well, you need to code that in. You need to think about the type of logic that you need to follow to systematically do that. For example, the logic could be look for everything to the left of the slash, and that's one place, and look for everything to the right of the slash, and that's another place. And what we want to make sure, and this is the main problem, is that we want to make sure that when we're cleaning this, we don't end up ruining some of the other already good data. And there's a great quote that I'm going to butcher now, but it's basically that being a data scientist is like being a detective in a movie where you're also the murderer, and that's exactly what the process is like. And the reason why I'm labouring the point around this so much is that because problems like this analysis process always takes much longer than you plan. And I've worked with organisations before, because it's so time consuming, what they really want to do is to automate it, or they can't automate it, delegate it, giving a junior data scientist or a junior data analyst the data set and say, okay, come back to me with the insights. In my opinion, this is a huge mistake. You need to spend the time getting to know the weird intricacies of that data so that you can actually understand it enough to then, when there's problems down the line, to be able to talk about those. And on the left-hand side, I'm just showing you, this is how I work most of the time. So this is called Jupyter Notebook. It's a way of experimentally coding, where you've got code cells and then visualization cells. So this is me really quickly scrolling through it. Intention's not to see anything on it. In fact, most of this code is broken because I work in an incredibly inefficient manner. So but like it's kind of like the mad scientist chaos thing where you're just making one plot and fixing something else. But this is kind of how, when I was talking about this stage, this is how I work. I'm kind of try one thing, divide one thing by another thing and see if this thing looks good. And it just takes some time. But eventually what you want is you want data that you can trust, data that all adds up, like the electoral divisions add up to the regular data. And then you're kind of come out of the valley of despair around the data cleaning and you're ready for visualization. Quick. So, data visualization, this is the fun part. And there are even, I was saying before, there's a few different ways of analyzing data, and every party tells you that theirs is the best. Well, for visualizing data, there's even more, and people are even more like vocal and convinced that their way is the best. Again, my advice here is to use things that you're comfortable with. Excel can visualize things just fine. Just don't use pie charts. That's the only thing. That's the only thing. You can use donut charts, which look like pie charts. There's no pie charts. And there's a few other really popular data visualization packages. Tableau is very popular around the world. You do have to pay for it. So again, I don't really want to be in a scenario where I have to pay for something. If I want to go into a company and work there, I have to be like, oh, sorry, you need to buy the software for me as well. That's just my own opinion. I prefer open source software. But there's also some nice kind of free options, or free-ish options. I really like Flourish, and that'd be the one, if there was one thing to kind of come out of here, if you haven't done any kind of data visualization before and you're not really a coder or anything like that, that'd be one thing I really recommend checking out is Flourish. And I'll have a link to it at the end of this talk. Kind of does low to no code data visualization, all interactive. And it kind of is a really nice way of learning about the different types of data visualizations you can look at. But broadly speaking, when you look at the kind of the top kind of data visualization practitioners, and the kind of the ones who are really innovating here are newsrooms. So not like newsroom for every typical news, but like those kind of teams. For example, if you saw any of the COVID tracker work at the Financial Times, those kind of the visualization teams in those newsrooms are having to kind of turn around these very robust, clean, clear, crisp data visualizations very quickly. And they all use a coding language called D3. So again, D3 is a coding language. It's based in JavaScript. It kind of works with HTML, which is the language of the web. So what you're seeing here is one big kind of web page that's made to look like a presentation. It's extremely powerful, but there's a bit of a steep learning curve. I usually don't recommend people actually learn it. It took me, quite a while doing it on the side while I was working to be able to kind of get to grips with it. And then depending on the data you have, certain types of visualizations are more correct to use than others. And I won't labor the point going through all the different rules because I've broken half of them on this presentation today. But there's a few really nice resources out there that kind of bring this to life. There's one I really like called Data to Viz. What I like about this website is you follow this kind of tree structure. You put in the type of data you have. So like my columns look like this. I have this is an example of a categoric data where I've got A's, B's, and C's. So this would be like counties, for example. Or you might say that, I've got some categorical information and some numerical information. I've got counties and I've got vacancy rates. And it tells you through this little tree what the different visualizations it recommends you use for that particular example is. It's a really nice way to kind of, you can instantly rule out lots of different things, because in this scenario you actually want constraints. It sounds strange, but like if you're sitting down there and you can do anything, you don't want to be in that scenario. It's like when someone says, if you're driving and someone says to you, put on a song, and you're like, what song? And they'll say, any song. And you're just there staring at Spotify trying to figure out what to put on. It's the same with this, so the constraints are good in this space. But I won't labor the point here too much, because what I often do is I don't work, like picking those visualizations kind of comes second nature to me. I've been doing it for a while now. But what I do at the start is I just scattergun my way through the whole thing. So a colleague of mine used to always say, you need to be willing to kill your darlings, which sounds very like mean and awful. But what it really means is not to get too attached to your early pieces. So I started playing around with a few different things. The first thing I looked at was just Dublin only, and looking at the reasons for Dublin broken out. So this type of diagram is called a Sankey diagram. It kind of shows flows between them. It was actually invented by a man in Tipperary in the 1800s. I think his name was like Lord Phineas something Sankey, and he was a mechanical engineer like me, and he was using it to show flows in engine cycles and stuff like that. So that was one way of thinking about it. So you can break it down by different areas of Dublin in terms of what the reasons for vacancy was. And then I stretched it out. So this is called a stretched core diagram. So I kind of took it for all of the counties in Ireland. I tried to see if you could break it down this way. I also brought in the kind of the GAA colours, I suppose, of every county as a visual motif to see if that worked. This is too full on. There's too much going on. You can't actually see anything on this. But again, I'm just putting everything in and playing around, seeing what comes out. And often, I said before that you do all that in the exploration phase. But because I work with interactive visualizations, often these visualizations are a very useful way to explore data as well, because you can drag things around, you can move things and so on. And then I started getting a bit weird, and this is called a hierarchical circular packing. And what it is that like every one of those balls is a county, and then inside there's lots of little circles that makes up all the electoral divisions. So once I had worked on this piece, I was like, okay, you're definitely going too far. Like I was, I was definitely going down the rabbit hole. So I think an important thing in these scenarios is knowing when to stop. One more I decided to look at, and I kind of limited my data to just Dublin for a while. One, because I'm from Dublin, so I'm very familiar. If some area of Dublin is way off, I would probably know about it, whereas I wouldn't know the same for Leitrim. And it just made the data a bit simpler to deal with. I didn't have to deal with as many of the problems I mentioned before. I had the Dublin data set cleaned and ready to go in about a day. So one thing I started thinking about was like flowing between different plots. So can we have dots that flow in to a map where you can then click on different parts of Dublin and then flows back out into these circles, and then we can manipulate these circles to do different things with them. We might take the circles and say, let's plot all the different vacancy rates into a distribution. Or we might say, let's plot the vacancy rates in 2 different years. Or we might say, let's split it across 4 different, what's the word? Like districts of Dublin.
Local authority.
Local authority, sorry, thank you. Expert. The delivery route down and those things. Can we split them that way? So this is kind of me looking at it from a different angle, thinking about more flowy type thing. So that was the kind of initial scattergun approach. Because I work with code, it's very easy to take the data, chuck it through lots of code, and get lots of different visualizations out. So it's only then that I actually start sketching. So most people will kind of sketch up front, but because I can do this stuff with code, I kind of just let it all come out, and sometimes that can inspire me. But the next step was to sketch, and I apologize for my awful sketches. But this is where we're showing warts and all. So this is where these are the warts. So I was sketching this in my pad, and I was kind of thinking about, what if we lock counties at different places? We might be able to show vacancy on top of those different places, and we might, and you can see some of my failed ideas here. I was thinking maybe about the local authorities orbiting a county. That was before I plotted them and saw there was like thousands of them, so that wasn't going to work. And I was also thinking about maybe orbiting a Leinster ball with all the Leinster counties around it and stuff like that, but I moved away from that. But I did like this idea, and you can see the box I put at the top is kind of showing the top 4. So I had this idea of maybe we have something that ranks, we're ranking these counties all the time, and we're kind of changing that around depending on what we're looking at. So that was the first bit. So I took the circles and was thinking about ranking those. And when sketching, I kept going back to the brief, which is vacancy. So like you're thinking about like what's the actual thing we're trying to look at here. And I kind of wondered what it would look like if I took like a bite out of every circle, and that bite meaning the vacant houses in that area. And I quite like that because it tied into the idea of vacancy. David McWilliams calls it a vandalism on society. And I quite like the idea of this chunk being missing from a county. I thought it was quite nice and powerful there. And it was around this time that the style guide for the exhibition arrived over from folks at Think. And this was great. This was great timing as well, because I was still working with all these GAA colours, and I wasn't intending to have this kaleidoscope of colour for the actual exhibition. But picking colours and stuff never actually comes that naturally to me. I used to always say in my last job that I get the real designers to do that. And it was great to get this design guide, and you see it around you in the exhibition here, and it's kind of 6 main colours, but usually those colours are just being used with that colour and black. So if we look at the banners along the walls, you see the blue ones, the pink one, and so on. And like I said earlier on, design constraints like this are actually great because they encourage you to try things that you wouldn't originally have considered. So what I started doing with this was taking those dots, or taking the circles, and changing it so the circles were all just black on a yellow background. Because I said, oh, that might actually tie in to the rest of the exhibition. So I did it with yellow first, actually, and I started kind of moving them around. I started bringing that in, and I really liked it. I thought, like, it kind of, it fed into the rest of the exhibition. I thought it kind of worked well. It was a little bit dull with the yellow. It was sometimes hard to see it so well, so I eventually kind of swapped over to pink. But I was like, until the 11th hour, I was like, I had my finger hovering over the yellow/pink button. So anyone who thinks I made a mistake, please don't tell me. So I then had the kind of, at this point, I kind of had the one, what we sometimes call like the hero image, right? I had the one that I was like, this is the kind of main, the main focal point of the piece, but I knew that it was going to be more of an explanation, more of a story. And so I had that kind of key screen, and I had some vague ideas of 1 or 2 others, like you saw earlier on, but not really any idea how to tie any of this stuff together. So the last step in this is to storyboard. So you're creating an overall narrative flow for the piece. And I usually map this out on paper. You can also do it in PowerPoint as well. I've worked with people who map this stuff out in PowerPoint. And what you're really trying to do is like figure out like what narrative actually makes sense. You don't want to hit people with too much information at the start. You want to provide something that's still snappy and catchy enough that they can sit down and watch it. And you need to make something that will hopefully get people in off the street as they're walking down Pier Street. So needless to say, for this stage, you need a deadline. If you don't have a deadline at this stage, you're going to be working on it forever. And I've had so many of my own personal projects just sitting on that little scrappy behind me because I haven't got an actual reason or a deadline for them. And I'll just keep faffing until I'm absolutely pulled away from it. So I started thinking about what the key screens were and how to link them together. And I decided that we'd start broadly at the kind of counties view. We'd interject or disperse little kind of key stats in between, and then we move it to a country's view. And once we move to a country's view, we could zoom in. And we could zoom in both in terms of, let's actually zoom in on Dublin and look at Dublin, but then also zoom into the kind of more granular data. And then we pull it back out for the end, which is around the reasons for vacancy. So actually the plot of the story is almost like the man in the hull that Kurt Vonnegut was talking about earlier. So I was kind of iterating with that, and you can see at this point I still had what's called like a scrolly telling. I love that word. Where you've got text scrolling on the left-hand side and everything's moving around to the right. At the start, I used to just call them the New York Times pieces because they were so synonymous with that, until some clever person came up with the name scrolly telling. But at this point, this is kind of when you go like, full-on Unabomber mode, where your head's just down in this data all the time. You've been studying everything. You've got all the stuff around and post-it notes and everywhere. Trying to explain it to my partner just wasn't working, and she just kind of left me be, which is fortunate. And getting fresh eyes on this stuff is super, super important. And I'm very grateful for the wonderful feedback that I got from the folks here at the exhibition, from the folks at Unthink. And the kind of main feedback I had for the piece as it was originally going to be this kind of scrolly telling piece where we've got visualizations on the right hand side and the scrolling text on the left. But there was a lot of text. You can see even in my slides here, this is me trying to keep my text down, and I just waffle. And this piece, by then we knew that this piece was going to be installed facing out into Pier Street. So the kind of key feedback I got from the folks here was that, like, could you do more with the piece to engage the passers-by? The data moving around is really cool. I don't know if we need the text. So that kind of led me to kind of create a different version for what you see here, which is like we're interspersing the visuals with some kind of key summary statistics. Again, the flow is the same, but we're kind of trying to do it in such a way that it's eye-catching, especially in the winter months when someone's walking along Pier Street and sees this kind of big pink thing here. They kind of stop and take a second look and hopefully come in. So again, if left to my own devices, I wouldn't have done this naturally, which is why it's so important to get that kind of good feedback at that stage so you can actually learn and iterate from there. But that's pretty much the story. So Dormant kind of opened along with the rest of the Housing a Lot exhibition around mid-October. We have about 3 days of the exhibition left. And I suppose the key points to get across as telling that story is, one, how many iterations it took to go through, how many false dawns there were, how many times I thought things were right and then actually they turned to be dead wrong, how much I had to rely on others. This was a solo piece, but I still needed, first of all, the design guide, which is what got me away from using my GA colours and getting into something that actually looked coherent and tied into the exhibition. Also getting feedback from different people in terms of how to design it best for people walking along the street. I kept the scrolling version and put that on the website as a kind of a portfolio piece as well. But it was like a lot of the stuff that is in the final piece I would never have done in a million years without all that feedback. So yeah, really, really thankful for that. And then just a couple of final kind of points, and again, we can talk about these after the talk if people have more specific questions. It's just a couple of resources around, like, if you're interested in analysing data or visualising data, where to look next. So this is in terms of analysing data, where to get started. Again, like I said, whatever you are most comfortable with, definitely do that. If you're kind of starting out your career, I think now, today, like, to be able to easily and quickly manipulate data, and you don't have to be a data scientist to do this, is an essential business skill. Because if you're a business leader, you're making decisions, those decisions are based on data. And if you're comfortable with playing around with data, you can look at that data and find problems or assumptions or holes in that data. So I really encourage people to learn a coding language. It really is a lot of fun. Like learning a regular language, it's much better if you're immersed in it and you have an actual problem to solve. And a great way of finding that is coming to some of the code meetups that there are around Dublin. So I went to, when I came back from to Ireland, I started going to things like the Python meetup, and I'd be talking to people who'd be learning to code in Python because they love photography. I wanted to set up something to automate their camera using Python. And you'd be talking to people who do all these wonderful applications, and when you get those ideas, you're like, oh yeah, that's really what it is. And that's how I encourage people to go to coding. Don't sit down and say, I'm going to learn this language, because that's like sitting down with the French textbook and saying, I'm going to learn grammar. You need to move to France. You need to, like, have a reason to do it, and then it comes really naturally. So that's around analysing data. And then in terms of visualising data, like I said earlier on, D3 is really wonderful. It's incredibly powerful, and there's some amazing people working with it. But it does have a very steep learning curve. So it's not something I'm recommending to people here unless you're already coders and you're doing some JavaScript already. If you're kind of keen to get started, I really would encourage checking out Flourish. Flourish lets you build data visualizations with nearly no code. One warning before I get anybody fired: with the free version of Flourish, all that you do is public, so don't be putting up any private client information on Flourish. I actually can't get fired because I work for myself, so I'm fine. I'm fine. You guys might not be. And then finally, there's some people in this space whose work has inspired me, and they're fantastic. Definitely check out their work if you kind of like this stuff. Nadia Bremer, Shirley Wu, Georgia Lupi, to name just 3. But like, if you're really into this field, or if you're kind of interested, just drop me a line, and I've got tons more recommendations as well. And kind of one more super awesome recommendation is this crowd called Data&Design. I heard about it. They do some fantastic stuff actually. Apparently they can like take data sets, and those data sets might be very technical data sets. They might be things like mapping out your organization. It might be things like looking at an ecosystem around your business, and they can take that data and bring it to life. So yeah, it sounds really promising actually. So if I ever found the person of that, I would definitely just give the contact after this call. So I think that's it. So thank you very much, and I'd love to thank Felix and everybody that was involved in the Housing a Lot exhibition, the guys from Unthink, and all of you for coming up on Valentine's Day to hear me talk about data cleaning and visualization. So thanks a million.